last year when we met. We're going to be recording this webinar. So just to make that available later for some of the people who haven't been able to join, we had a few requests. So yeah, Yashna.
Your slide hasn't shifted. Just wanted to share that.
Oh. What about now?
No.
Okay. Sorry, technical glitches. How about now? Sorry, it's not in full screen, right? Can you see the third slide now? Okay, super. So yeah, I'll just start again. Got thrown off my script there a bit. So my name's Akshay. I'm one of the partners and co-founders at Ulloy. We are a 13-member team today, and you can see most of our team there in that photo when we met last year. And thanks so much for joining this webinar. It's the first webinar we're doing for our Stories from the Ground product. And we're recording this webinar to put it online so that more people can kind of access and understand what we've been building. So let me just start off with really quickly around what we do at Ulloy as a whole. And our focus as an organization is very much to work with primarily with social impact organizations, and we help them in their journey of creating impact. And what we do is help them execute programs, evaluate programs, and also work better with others in their sector, in the regions that they work in through network weaving practices. And a primary focus of our work is the knowledge and the voices of frontline workers, community members, and it's really important for us that that knowledge is made visible, it's made accessible more widely, and putting that sort of front and center in our work. And I think the way that we do that, right, is we try and have a very strong focus across everything we do to make, tacit knowledge visible. Sorry, Yashna.
We can't see your slide change. I'm sorry. I can screen share if that's.
Okay. 1 second. I'll just, I think it's the presenter notes that's the problem. Now?
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially what we're really focused on, right, in how are we kind of doing this, right? Making the knowledge of frontline workers visible and accessible. We do that by focusing on the tacit knowledge of these workers. So all of these workers have a fair bit of experience in what they're doing, but very often that sits with them. We never capture that. And what then happens is you're not building a really holistic institutional memory. And so how do you enable that documentation, which is across hierarchies, across verticals, to build a really textured institutional memory? And part of that is to document program implementation, insights, observations, challenges as they're happening, and to be able to see how a program has been iterated. And part of that is really saying that how do you put the right information in the hands of people to inform their decision making. And usually what that tends to mean is putting that in the hands of, say, senior leadership, in the hands of funders. But our focus very much has been on how do you make it available to these frontline workers to enable their decision making. But how do you do that, right? For us, it's about making multiple data sets come together. In our work, what we had observed was various organizations have data sets in various formats. Sometimes those data sets are not talking to each other. Maybe they're across years in different software. But the most critical one is how do you get qualitative and quantitative data together? And when we are talking about qualitative data, we're also talking about all that knowledge and that tacit knowledge that exists at the grassroots, along with the quantitative programmatic data that you might already be collecting. So it's not just enough to create the right tools, to have the right intention. It means going on journeys with organizations, with programs to enable organizational sort of behavior change around knowledge sharing and around building the right rituals and practices to both enable sharing and to make sense of what has been shared. This photo is from Feb 2019 when we started working with the water quality network around storytelling. And that's been a long association going on about 5 years now. And what we're doing here when we're talking about organizational behavior change is we're saying that program design needs to be more than just happening, and knowledge sharing needs to be happening not just at the end of a program, but it needs to be dynamic. It needs to be going on as the program is changing, as people are learning, and that the knowledge exchange needs to be happening in multiple directions, not just top down, but laterally between grassroots workers, across verticals. And also, when we're talking about monitoring, rather than looking at it as a way to keep a check on the workers, right? How do you use that as a way to learn from your program staff, from frontline workers to improve programs? And most importantly, when we talk about supporting first mile workers, we often talk about technical support, about knowledge to enable program execution. But are we giving the right kind of emotional support? Are we saying it's okay if something didn't work? And how do you go about doing something about that? Are we doing enough of that? And how do you build the right rituals and spaces for support? But for us, when we started saying these are our goals, this is what we want to work on, we started asking a smaller question. How can people on the ground share their knowledge? How is that going to happen? And how are we going to enable that peer learning, right? Across these verticals, laterally, and across programs. And I think where we came to from our experience as researchers and as practitioners was that stories are the way that we can capture and share nuances. And this goes back to our experiences spending time in the field. And anytime you ask questions, you get stories, you get an explanation through the form of an incident, an anecdote, or a story about a person. And that's what it comes down to, whether it's insights about systems, whether it's about the challenges that somebody has faced, or the nuance of how a program is playing out. All of that gets captured in stories, and stories also then become a really accessible way to communicate with stakeholders. Now, whether those stakeholders are your own teammates, whether that's another organization you're collaborating with, or a donor who wants to try and understand beyond the statistics, right? What actually happened in your program? What sort of challenges you faced? What did you do during your program implementation? Stories are a fantastic way of doing that. Now, that's where our product Stories from the Ground comes in. And what we're going to do in the webinar today is talk a little bit about what Stories from the Ground as a product enables and go into some of the details. We're not going to go into a lot of detail given that we have a very tight time and we want to keep time at the end. On the one hand, to support everybody to ask questions, make comments, and have a bit of a discussion here. And also what we're going to do is share a little Google form to help you think through what your Stories from the Ground setup can potentially look like. So to begin with, what does Stories from the Ground enable? Essentially, it enables three things. It enables you to collect stories. It enables you to discover stories in various ways. And finally, we have a set of tools that help you analyze each of these stories and create meaning from that to use in your program implementation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into each of these and talk a little bit about how we enable that. I think the most important piece that we're talking about is how do you capture that tacit knowledge to begin with, right? And how do you help people contribute their experiences, their challenges, their ideas? And the basic point is that we have custom templates where we have guidelines to help people add content. In these slides, you're going to see little videos on the side that show what some of these templates look like. And like you saw in the template here, you can add photos, you can add text, but is that enough? Is it enough simply to have a template? Now you could do that on Google Forms. What we've done over the last 4 years of working on this idea around storytelling is we've worked with experts and with field staff across different programs to understand how this process can be made easier, how it can work better. Part of that is simplifying what a template looks like. So on the one hand, you could have a blank page like a WordPress or a Medium. On the other hand, you could have a Google form, and that essentially is a whole set of questions where you're not really storytelling anymore. You're essentially reporting. What we've come to is a sort of a middle ground where people talk about context, they tell you the actual story and what the current situation is. But even that's not enough. While it gives a little bit of structure, where what we found from our research was that very often people get stuck. Not that they don't have something to say, but they get stuck. And that's where our hints come in, and various sorts of features that we built that enable these triggers to help your program staff or frontline worker think and articulate the actual story. Now, it's not enough just to have those stories. Having ways in which you can tag them and create collections is important. So every story has a set of settings that you can tag it by. Our partner Water Quality Network tags their stories by location, so which district or which state a particular story is taking place in, or what water contaminant is it about? Is it about arsenic? Is it about fluoride or iron? What that enables them to do is to be able to see stories around specific tags in collection pages. And I'll talk about that in discovery. Now, again, you're going to be like, how many of my frontline staff are going to be comfortable typing out long stories? And that's where, and this was more of, let's say, a discovery than a feature that we have built in. But because our system works really well in conjunction with Android phones, the Google keyboard allows for very easy voice to text. And what we've seen is that some of our more prolific writers on Water Quality Network and other platforms are able to do so because they're simply transcribing from their voice to text and then editing it. What you might have also noticed is that we support input on the stories template in pretty much any script that Google supports. Now, there is another challenge that we saw. A lot of our partners who might want frontline workers or communities to contribute to the platform, to stories. And what we've done is we've partnered with Glyphic and used the Glyphic chatbot interface to build a WhatsApp interface for our Stories from the Ground platform. And so through a conversational process, we can support your program staff to be able to contribute a story, all with photos and with text and even doing the tagging. And that's a really interesting space that we've been exploring over the last year. Now, one of the prime examples is Water Quality Network. They've been our partner since before Ulloy existed. And we've been kind of building out the storytelling features with them and with a few other partners. While we will, I think my colleagues are going to paste the links shown on the slide over here. You can make your way to waterquality.network and see some of the stories. What you'll also see, of course, is that the Water Quality Network hosts a lot of other type of content as well. And that's because Stories from the Ground is powered by the Open Knowledge Framework, which allows for various kinds of input. And the network goes beyond simply collecting stories, and we can add a number of different templates. As you can see, I'm just going to share sound here so you can hear this video by Sachin ji. Just let me know if you can hear sound.
Or experience.
So this is we had done a learning session with INREM Foundation, who anchor Water Quality Network, and Sachin ji works in the Jhabua team. He's been with them for over a decade. And here he's sharing his experience of using the storytelling platform. I'm just going to go back a bit.
और एक्सपीरियंस अच्छा रहा था कि किस तरह से एक जो बच्चा जिसके पैर टेढ़े थे और एक अजी पहली बार हमारे जितने भी केस थे उसमें भी एक ये केस अलग ही टाइप का था, तो उसको लेकर हमने लिखा, किस तरह उसके साथ काम किया, उसके माता पिता को कन्विंस किया, और फ्लोराइड फ्री पानी है, गुड न्यूट्रिशन है, जो कैल्शियम मैग्नीशियम विटामिन सी प्रोटीन, और फिर जो समय समय पे हम काउंसलिंग करते थे वो सारा चीजें उसमें आया। और लास्ट में चेंज क्या हुआ लास्ट 2 साल में, वो एक कंक्लूजन के रूप में लिखा था हमने।
So this is Sachin ji talking about his experience of sharing the story of one of the children that he has worked with over the last decade in Jhabua district, where he lives and works. And here we have another story, and this one is from, again, the Water Quality Network, talking about a group of Adivasi women in Odisha, where they have been kind of working, INREM has been working with them to help create ways in which they can get access to safe drinking water, but also kind of mitigate the effects of high fluoride that's affected that population for quite some time. You can read all these stories on waterquality.network. It's open access. So those were some of the points that we wanted to share around how adding stories becomes fairly easy. But it's not enough for you to simply collect the stories. What we also want the platform to enable is for the right stories to be discovered, for you to be able to see stories juxtaposed with each other, which normally you might not see, so that you can build meta narratives, you can gain better insight, and to support program staff directly reading about other stories that interest them. Now, how does that actually work, right? If you remember, we talked about tagging stories. So you can tag stories by different topics. Here we see on the Water Quality Network page, you can filter. You have a listing page here, which is simply listing all the stories on the platform. And what you can do is use filters to be able to see what different stories are there as per the topic. Now, this is an interesting piece that we've built over the last year around collection pages. For us, this goes back to that idea of how do you put the quantitative and qualitative together. Very often dashboards are simply one or the other. And what we've tried to do with collection pages is have a fairly customizable, configurable space where, say, for a collection page that you have, and collection pages are very important. Every tag that you create on the platform can have a collection page based on a certain template. In this case, we've mocked up what a platform around malnutrition might look like. And this is a collection page for Maharashtra. And what you'll be able to see then are stories about that. You'll be able to see the tags or the indicators which have been most tagged in Maharashtra. And you could do this for a particular district. You could set up collection pages for thematics. And it's a very, very important way in which we're seeing that our partners are going to be discovering content. I spoke briefly about filters earlier. So on listing pages, based on the topics that you've tagged in the sort of meta tagging part of it, you can kind of select certain filters and the page automatically filters out those particular stories. Filters, of course, work in conjunction with each other. So, you can have a number of filters sort of working together to narrow down and find a story that makes absolutely, which is more focused on what you're looking at. Sorry. Now, discovery, one is, a sort of a pull discovery where people are coming to the platform and they're discovering, things on the platform. You can, of course, share links out to a particular story, to a collection page, if your platform is public. But what you can also do is, we have a module around newsletters. So you can set up a mailing list and send out periodic newsletters, which an editor or a steward of the platform can decide which pieces of content from your platform go out. And, you have a whole managed system and a really simple template to be able to do that. In this case, what we're seeing is quite a few of the articles are about a particular area around stubble burning, and imagine a platform that is collecting news stories about that, sending out a newsletter. So that is about discovery. But then we talk about analysis. Now, when we talk about discovery, it's about those stories being available. But when we're talking about analysis, what we want is almost we want to enable you to almost treat all the stories as qualitative data. And these stories are usually rich with nuance and with details. And if you're able to analyze that in more detail, you'll be able to get more data on the go, insights on the go, to improve and create a more iterative and responsive program. Now, how do you do that? We enable that through an annotation feature. In the example shown, we undertook, the Ubloy team undertook a whole process of understanding how NGOs use data, how networks are woven earlier last year. And we used a version of the platform for our research. And what you see here is a colleague of mine going through their notes, after a conversation, a primary research conversation they had, and they're going through and tagging certain fragments into separate tags, and you can create new tags, all of that, right? So what you see here is a way to pull out specific fragments, which might be anecdotes, which might be insights from the actual stories that are being collected on the platform. But then what happens with that? What we then enable is you're tagging them with specific tags, right? So within networks or within data, you might click on one of the tags. And when you go through that tag to say data management, you'll be able to see all the fragments which have enabled, which have been annotated on that. And then as you start reading through, you can start building a larger picture around data management because you're reading those insights across stories. Sorry. So what is Stories on the Ground about? At a very basic level, it's about collecting stories. It's about discovering what stories are coming in and to be able to do that as they come in. And then, really looking at stories as qualitative data, annotating them, putting them through this analysis dashboard process to see what insights are coming out. This is a very brief and a very quick sort of glimpse of what the Stories from the Ground product is, capable of. I am going to now kind of just pause and kind of want to hear from the group we have on call today. Do you have any questions, thoughts, comments, feelings? I forgot to say this earlier, but you could have also put those questions in chat and my colleagues would have answered, but I think we're doing okay on time. So we should be able to do that. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see who we have on call. Right. I think this is an open call at this point, so please feel free to unmute and ask questions. Seeing some familiar faces after a very long time. Hi. Come on, I didn't do that great a presentation. I'm sure there are questions.
So I have a question. Hi,
Please go ahead, Patni.
I'm Padmini. I'm the founder of Design Beko. I'm based in Bangalore. Thanks so much for that. It looks amazing. I really like the annotation tool. It looks really kind of smart and intuitive. My question was, and obviously the way that you've made it really easy for people who have Android phones to use, that's fantastic. But I think something that we find when we do kind of collaborative archive building is that how does one ensure the consistency of tags, right? And also, how is that working multilingually? Like, we've been working with healthcare navigators on the ground in Channapatna, and so they have been tagging mostly in Kannada. So we are a little torn as to whether we want to translate the tags or we want to keep the Kannada word because it sometimes means something which is very specific to the context. So that's one challenge that we have. And the second thing, which is kind of related to that, is how does moderation work? Because it's possible, that people might be getting the tags wrong, or they might be, so is there a layer of moderation? How does that work? Is that within the organization, or is that something you all do? So yeah, if you can just say a little bit about those. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll take the second question first. And I think there was a little bit around access control in the chat while I was speaking. But the way the system is set up is that we can set up roles, right? And different people have different roles. At a very basic level, the basic package on Stories from the Ground comes with a couple of roles, right? Which is the administrator and the contributor, in that sense. But what you can do is you can set up more roles if you'd like, in a classic sort of WordPress fashion. You could have an admin person, somebody who's managing everything across the platform. Then you can have a moderator, and then you can have some, say, vetted users, people who can just post without any, without having to have their posts, go through a moderation process. But then you could have contributors who cannot publish directly to the platform. They have to submit for moderation, right? So that's one part of it. Given that you have that much granularity available, administrators or moderators or whatever you want to call the roles, those are what, say, we call the roles. You might call them program leads and regional officers and ground staff, whatever. The point is that somebody who has moderation rights can go in and edit a story and clean it up and things like that. So those sort of features are available, and that's something in general. I just want to address your last part of that question. Do we do it? Does the organization do it? I think in general, our philosophy around how we work with our partners is to support them and be with them through the process of them using and enabling the use of their platforms, but that we are supporting them build the rituals and the muscle to steward the platform and manage it themselves. So we try and take that role in that sense. So that moderation, the management of content, the responsibility of that content lies with the partner who is enabling that content to be put on the system. And what we've seen across the various deploys that we've done, or the various platforms that we've set up, is that people take different views depending on how they're going to be using the platform. Some people have a purely public platform. Some people have a completely private platform. Some people say that some of the content can be public, some of it can't be. So there are different ways of kind of managing that part of it. And the first one, the tags piece. I think my friends from Veditam are also here. I think one thing we've realized is that there is no magic formula, I think, to this. There is, and having a chat with Abrar earlier today, that is a part of this process. It's like gardening, right? You need to be de-weeding and pruning, and so data cleanup is just an essential part of a process like this. What we do though is when we're setting up these templates, we have a very um, concerted effort to say, do you really want somebody to be able to create tags here or not? Does this actually need creation of tags, or are there slightly smarter ways of dealing with it so that your ability to discover is not hampered? At the same time, people are able to express something that they want to, right? So we're also not, for example, doing tags that are just tags, right? Because we're doing categories of things. What you're then able to do is do a lot more, start them off with a set already, for example, right? And so that people are not necessarily creating the set of tags, you're giving them a set within which you want them to work. And one thing is, this technology is not going to replace human interaction, right? We often talk about this being a socio-technical product. So the technology is one part of it, but the spaces that you have to create, the rituals that you create to actually talk with the people also, review the stories that have come up, celebrate them, understand them. That's when you also then get feedback to improve the platform, just like you improve your program. So that's part of the response, Padmini. I think in terms of multilingual tags, I don't think I want to go into that much detail on something that's fairly technical. Maybe we can take that offline. Super. Thank you so much for those questions. I think Shashidhar had a comment. I think how the gaps got so. Shashidhar in the chat talks about finding it interesting how the gaps about the story collecting, putting together, and its applications with respect to understanding the groundwork. He's curious about the operations and how you can make it ingrained and how that evolves with different organizations. So Shashidhar, thank you for that. I think, like I just mentioned, when I was addressing Padmini's question, was you need to build those rituals. You need people have, I think, an inherent kind of skill to do storytelling, but that doesn't mean that it's honed. And part of our work, and you can call it an add-on to the platform, is to work with organizations to do this training, to help build these rituals. And that's a slower process. It's something that we've done with the water quality network in the early days, and now that's a system they're able to do that training, etc., themselves as the network grows. But it's also something that we're doing with a partner called FMCH in Bombay, and really working with their team to build those rituals, to build that muscle, and really do an iterative work with them on templates and things like that. So there is work involved. It's not going to be magic for sure, but hopefully it's something close to that. But thanks for that comment and question, Shashidhar. I think Ro from Hasirudala is next, so please.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
It's a very interesting concept, and I guess I'll have to take it back to the team. But just to clarify, like, how do you decide? Like, this is a lot of content, and some of this will be a lot of data. So how do we negotiate ownership of all of that content and data? Like,
It's
or
yours.
is it just...
There is no negotiation. I mean, it's yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but then, especially if we're talking at some point that it's, one of my earlier questions had been, how do we keep it private? Is it shareable? And this can be moderated, right? You can decide who has access. So once that's done, there is no, we're sort of working on a trust system, right? Like, if this data is used, it'll be used with accreditation, that sort of thing.
So part of the process that we do with our partners is also we worked with a legal expert to draw up a sort of boilerplate terms of use, right? And what that does is, and we share that boilerplate, was organizations that we work with may not have these things thought through. How are they, what kind of is it Creative Commons? Is it not Creative Commons? Is it your copyright? Things like that. What we do is we share that boilerplate, and we have you kind of fill out that boilerplate, and that's a contract between you and the user of the platform, right? And whoever that is, in some cases, that's just your program team. And so maybe your relationship is governed by other, contracts that you might have. But on the platform, then that's a contract between you and the user of the platform. And you can then say that the content added here has this sort of license, right? And we can put that sort of license text or things like that in the footer, stuff like that. And that can change from platform to platform. You can choose to make the platform completely private. That's up to you. I don't know if that answers your question at all, because I mean,
Right.
that's essentially around any content on your website, for example, right? If you put a Creative Commons share with accreditation sort of license, it's the same basic logic. So
Yeah, I think Ro, your question also had that can it be open, like for people to access? In that case, it is open for people to access. I mean, that is a choice between what you take as a platform approach. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you, both of you.
yeah, super. Thank you. I think there was another hand up. I think Pooja.
Pooja from
Did you?
LinkedIn. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Pooja.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm
Hi.
Pooja Ashodhara from Reap Benefit. So at Reap Benefit, we value numbers a lot. So I heard, like from your explanation, it's evident that this platform is more, qualitative data oriented one. However, any impact is like mostly measured in terms of quantitative data. So I just wanted to understand the intention behind probably prioritizing qualitative type of data in case you're doing that. I have other questions too. Should I ask that now?
Sure. Maybe I can address them in some more logical order, or I can go one at a time, whichever. Why don't you ask your questions?
Okay, all right. So one more thing was we are talking about sharing the knowledge sharing exchange and all that, right? Like in case your product is for a particular organization only, then my question is how do we ensure knowledge sharing happens, like probably these data points are important for some other organizations as well, like for many different reasons. Now how do we make sure knowledge sharing happens? That's the second question. And then the third question is, in our organization, we actually are like, we do value the stories from the ground a lot, and we do have a chatbot and cloud source data, like where we are collecting the data, making sure that these stories are collected. Probably like it can get better, definitely. But for someone like us, what is the add-on we have from stories from ground? So these are the questions. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. So I'm just going to answer them in order. So the first question was if we are prioritizing qualitative data over quantitative. Let me kind of address that. I think I don't think we say that one data is more important than the other. Part of the problem, let's say, with how monitoring and evaluation has been happening, right? Or it's not a problem, it's really a movement or an iteration or an evolution that's already happening, is monitoring and evaluation is being looked at through a lens towards adaptive programs, iterative programs, and bringing in the L in the MEL, right? Monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And I think part of that is going to be if you've got some quantitative data, right? If you're able to dive deeper and understand how that affected one person, one family, right? It adds a lot more nuance, allowing you to understand what's the story behind the data, or what are the many stories behind the data, even if they are sort of conflicting, right? And you're able to then understand what happens with that data. Now, on the platform, Stories from the Ground is very focused on enabling. It's a simpler part of version of our product. It allows for people to add those stories, but we have a whole suite of products that allows for data visualization, and that's what is exciting for us. So say Reap Benefit is using the Glyphic chatbot, all that data goes and sits in BigQuery. You probably are using, Google Data Studio to look at. So we also have been doing work with Glyphic. So I know how that pipeline works, right? To some extent, at least in that project. So if you've got a Google Data Studio dashboard maybe, or you're using some other dashboarding software where you're pulling the data, right, through APIs, you can just as easily pull that data through APIs onto this platform, right? And you will be able to see stories, you'll be able to see your quantitative data according to, say, a particular locality, right? So suppose you're doing some work in, you're enabling Solve Ninjas to do projects in Indiranagar, right? And you could have an Indiranagar collection page where you're able to see the projects undertaken, projects that are going on right now. Maybe you can start seeing what are the thematics around which ninjas are working, and the actual stories that they're sharing, right, with more nuance. What's great is that you already have a chatbot, that the people you're working with are familiar with. We can just help to create a conversational flow within that chatbot and pull that data on a platform, right? And I think that was your third question, is why have the platform if we've already got a chatbot? The chatbot is a fantastic interface for certain types of users to be able to add data, right? And it's good for certain types of data, to tag it, to share it, etc. It's very immediate. But what the platform does is it gives you very well-designed ways in which to access that data, to make sense of it, to be able to then see what meaning happens, right? For example, if Solve Ninjas are sharing a bunch of stories, right? So maybe, not Indiranagar, you want to see everything that people are doing around waste management, right? Around garbage across the country. And then you're the person who's looking at waste management as a thematic and reap benefit. And you're going through those stories, right? The quantitative data, broadly what the patterns are, but you want to understand how you support the ninjas better. Maybe you want to design a learning module to enable them to do that work better. Then when you start going through the stories, you start doing the annotation, and maybe there's an analysis dashboard specifically for your thematic, and you start seeing some patterns, and then you're able to better support the people on the ground who are doing this work, right? And that is what a platform like this enables, which a dashboard that pulls quantitative data is going to be a lot tougher to do it with. Not saying it's impossible, but that's what something like this potentially enables. And your second question around knowledge sharing, how is that happening across organizations? So I think I don't know if I should be teasing this or I should just share this, but we're looking at ways on how you can enable sharing of stories, sharing of knowledge at a societal scale, right? So how do stories from various platforms come together and are accessible, and giving that agency to the organizations anchoring these platforms to be able to say, I want this story, to be public, to be part of that, societal repository of stories and experiences. So we're working on that. So stay tuned. There's another webinar in our future that talks about that. I don't know if I answered your questions, Pooja. Very quick
Yes,
fire, but
you did. Thank you so much.
okay, my pleasure. Ro, last question. What about the cost? So I think, Yashna shared. We have two pricing models. You can see them on the website. Stories from the ground. There are certain limitations within the pricing that we've put for certain add-ons, like for a lot more people to be using the platform, for multiple templates, for additional languages, or WhatsApp chatbot integration, IVRS integration, or newsletter integration. You will be able to do that. I'm just going to ask my colleagues to share the Google form. Within the last 10 minutes of this, Yashna and Saurabh, one of them will share a Google form with you. This Google form is really a tool for thinking. I was pushing to make like a fancy canvas and all of that, but I was shot down, and we have a much simpler Google form. Don't think of this as a way in which you are making decisions. about what your setup for stories from the ground looks like. What we wanted was to ask some questions to trigger some thinking, around how you might use stories, who will be writing these stories, what will they be writing about. And so I'll open this up and share my screen. Just a second. And you can, of course, submit the form and share it with us, or when you share the form, you'll get a copy of your responses. So most of these are not required questions, because it's more of a thinking tool as opposed to a tool for us to collect your data and understand what exactly you want to do, although that would be useful when we take our conversation forward. So what's the purpose of collecting the stories? What would the stories be about? Who would be writing these? What are the collections you'd like to see? As you remember, I talked about collection pages, could be about thematic issues, like we talked about a reap benefits example. It could be about access to water, trash on the street, potholes, for example, or it could be regional, right? Or it could be something very specifically in your program, something that is not relevant to others. Do you think an annotation and analysis dashboard is useful for you? If yes, then how would you be using? Who would be using that? And then details. And these are some details we want you to try and visualize. Where would this sit? Would this just sit on stories.vedatam.org, or would it sit on moving upstream stories from the ground.in, or something else? If you had to describe it in 100 characters or 50 characters, being brief is difficult, as I have demonstrated today. And then how many people do you think will be writing these stories on the platform? Would they be public, private? Would it be mixed? And then what add-ons would you like, right? Do you want the training add-on? Maybe WhatsApp chatbot? We can integrate with Exotel powered IVRS. We also have learning modules, etc. And if you can write a little bit about what add-ons you might want, we can have that. Like we've shown data collection and visualization here, Pooja, related to what you were talking about. And finally, a little bit of information about you, your name, organization, type of organization, and your role. And if you share that with us, we'd love to kind of get in touch and carry the conversation forward. Basically, the form is there. We're going to keep the room open for some time. I'm just going to share my screen again. Yeah, you can see more on our website, and these are the email IDs for Yashna and me. You can write to either of us or both of us, and we'll take this conversation forward. Yashna, Saurav, if you all can just share the email IDs here, and maybe also we can share the Calendly link so that people can just block time to speak with us if they'd like to. We're at 4:55. We have 5 more minutes left on the scheduled time, but we're going to kind of keep the room open for some more time. I'm going to stop recording at this point.